Humans are naturally inquisitive creatures by nature. We seek answers to the things that we do not know. But what happens when that curiosity goes a bit too far? What happens when someone's desire to learn more crosses both the moral and legal line that exists between normal curiosity and something less human? Well, today, you're about to find out. Here are 10 horrifying human experiments that actually happened. Number 1 are the Digestion Experiments. In 1822, a man in Michigan named Alexis St. Martin received a gunshot wound to his abdomen. Amazingly, the man survived. However, the bullet hole in his stomach never healed properly. A doctor named William Beaumont realized the strange value behind the man's wound and decided to conduct a gruesome experiment to better understand the human digestion process. He tied a piece of string to some food and inserted it into the man's stomach through the hole, causing tremendous pain to St. Martin. Beaumont would even occasionally pull the food out every few hours to inspect it as it was digested. However, as disturbing as this sounds, the experiment actually provided a window of knowledge to doctors who previously knew very little about the human digestion process. Kind of makes you think about the amount of trust that we give to doctors, doesn't it? Remember that next time you're under anesthesia. Number 2 is the mustard gas experiments. Mustard gas, developed during World War I, is a chemical weapon that creates large and painful blisters to the skin and lungs. The effects are often far worse than that and often lead to death when inhaled. In 1943, the US military decided to experiment using the gas on a group of 18-year-old boys fresh out of boot camp by testing the gas on their equipment. Nearly all of the test subjects received severe injuries from the experiments, including severe permanent scarring of the lungs and painful blisters and burns to their entire body. Number 3 are the Agent Orange experiments. During 1965 and 1966, dermatologist Dr. Albert Kligman began a series of disturbing experiments on the inmates of Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia. One of these experiments included secretly testing the effects of Agent Orange, a chemical weapon used to destroy crops and vegetation, on a group of inmates. Kligman injected a toxin from Agent Orange at a dosage of 468 times that of the normal exposure into prisoners, causing them to convulse and develop horrible and painful acne in sensitive areas of their bodies like their armpits, groin, and face. But what may be most disturbing is that upon entering the prison for the first time and seeing what would be his future subjects, Kligman was quoted as saying, "All I saw before me were acres of skin." Goes to show you that monsters aren't always just in bad dreams. Number 4 are the Tuskegee Experiments. What happened in Tuskegee, Alabama in 1932 is a conspiracy theorist dream. Over the course of 40 years, government-funded doctors conducted a barbaric experiment on African American male patients. Some patients, like those that were infected with syphilis, a painful sexually transmitted disease, were flat out denied treatment even after penicillin was invented to study the effects of the virus. But in an even more twisted experiment, some subjects were given fake placebo treatments, causing all but 74 of them to die painfully from a disease that was treatable. In the end, 28 patients died directly from syphilis, 100 died from complications related to it, and 40 of the patients' wives were actually infected with syphilis, along with 19 children who were born with congenital syphilis. Number 5 is the Chamber Experiment. Around 1965, during the Cold War, the Soviets conducted numerous horrendous experiments on their prisoners. They developed a deadly poisonous gas that was tasteless and odorless. In order to test its effectiveness, they created a laboratory known as the Chamber. It was there that they would test the gas on living and unwilling prisoners. However, the experiment did not end there. The prisoners were also fed a mixture of mustard gas, ricin, digitoxin, among others. The experiments led to the Soviets developing a poison called C2, which, reportedly was so potent that it would actually physically change the victim, disfiguring them and causing death within only 15 minutes. Number 6 is the Aversion Project. In 1971, Dr. Aubrey Levin led a scientific project in South Africa during their racial segregation. The focus of the project was to try and cure homosexuality in members of the South African military. The subjects of these experiments, who were usually drafted into the service against their will, would be sent off to a military hospital known as Ward 22. Men between the ages of 16 and 24 were forced into electric shock treatments, chemical castrations, and even gender reassignment surgeries. In total, around 900 people were subjected to Levin's twisted sexual reorientation experiment. But in what may be the most disturbing twist of all is that up until 2010, he was still teaching medicine at a university here in Canada. Number 7 is Project 4.1. Project 4.1 was the name given to an experimental medical study conducted by the United States of America of the residents of the Marshall Islands exposed to the radioactive fallout from the March 1st, 1954 Castle Bravo nuclear test in Bikini Atoll. They wanted to determine the extent of the effects of significant beta and gamma radiation in living humans. They discovered that almost all of the women exposed to the devastating radiation had stillbirths and malformities in their babies. Unfortunately, some may argue that those who did die were in fact the lucky ones, as the children and subjects who did survive all got aggressive cancer and painful malformities that they had to suffer with until their untimely deaths. Number 8 is the Electrified corpse experiment. Back in 1708, Luigi Galvani, a professor of anatomy in Italy, was experimenting on a dead frog when he found that electricity caused involuntary muscle movements within the animal's body. News of the discovery spread, and by the 1800s, Luigi's nephew Giovanni had taken the experiment on the road as a gruesome spectacle. Only, instead of using a dead frog, his curiosity moved him into testing it on deceased humans. Giovanni would connect the wires of a 120-volt battery to different body parts of a corpse and then observe its violent spastic reactions to the electrical currents. Of course, all of this was in front of an audience of horrified people who believed that the body was actually coming back to life. Number 9 is the Stanford prison experiment. In August of 1971, Stanford University professor Philip Zimbardo conducted an experiment involving students in a simulated prison. Zimbardo wanted to study the effects of putting good-natured people into an evil environment by creating 2 equal groups, one of guards and one of prisoners. The power structure between the guards and inmates was a powerful negative force that ended up corrupting the guards, causing many of them to develop genuine sadistic tendencies. This led to extremely dangerous and mentally damaging events, while the inmates became increasingly rageful and degraded. Zimbardo had to shut down the experiment prematurely after only 6 days, when he realized that it was having an astoundingly toxic effect on their behaviors as well as his own. And number 10 is the monster study. In perhaps what is the most sadistic experiment occurred in 1939. Speech pathologist Wendell Johnson from the University of Iowa and his grad student Mary Tudor experimented on 22 normal-speaking orphaned children. The children were split into 2 groups and given speech therapy for stuttering. The first group of children were treated well and were even encouraged and rewarded for their speech skills. However, the second group of orphans were criticized and ridiculed for even the smallest errors in their speech. The children from the first group received no negative effects from their therapy. However, the kids from the second group developed psychological problems and speech issues that followed them into adulthood that they were forced to live with for the rest of their miserable lives. They literally created monsters. So, 10 horrifying human experiments that actually happened. I want to know from you in the comments, which on this list was the absolute most disturbing? Or is there another experiment out there that occurred that I was not aware of that I may have missed? Also leave that in the comments, let's get a discussion going, and I will see you in the next video. Sweet dreams.